Alright guys, how's it going? This is going to be a shorter video than usual. It's slightly different again, it's just been kinda long since I last did my Volta Vega video, and I really just want to get something out there. So what I'm going to do is recap the last month, while also taking a look at some developments. It's been a kinda slow month in all honesty, even by my standards. This Afterburner tutorial was actually at the end of last month, but I started noticing that a few other smaller YouTubers had started using these on-screen display stats, and I saw my name mentioned in one or two videos, but there may also be a slight issue with the on-screen display. That's something I will talk about later in this video. It's kinda been a month of me trying out different stuff. I was getting really bored with the technology news, or the lack of it. I mean, let's just actually start with that, the Volta Vega video. It was a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks ago now, that Nvidia had their GTC, but it really wasn't that interesting. Artificial intelligence and all that stuff, take it or leave it, but I somehow managed to talk about that for about 8 minutes. Then we moved on to Vega, where we saw one or two more demos, but really the big news there I think was that Vega was delayed, and it is now delayed. A lot of people have been talking about it being delayed for months, almost 6 months. That's a load of crap. Vega was never coming in October. In actual fact, last May, just over a year ago, I had analysed a few bits and pieces of obscure tech information and pointed out that there was simply no chance that Vega was coming in October, which was the rumour of that time. And this is what I said. But that's not going to be the case with Vega. However, I guess based on this, we could be looking at up to a year after Polaris is launched before we actually see Vega. That October rumour that was doing the rounds, I never liked it. And judging by this, we are at least 7 months and probably closer to a year away from actually seeing Vega. A year after Polaris launched before we see Vega. Well, that's looking exactly like what it is. This October rumour was complete garbage. Vega was always coming middle of 2017. The thing is though, AMD has now kinda pulled a bit of a bait and switch on us with this Frontier Edition stuff, which is Vega for the professional markets, not the consumer markets. To me, this all points to one thing. Vega is having some serious driver issues when it comes to gaming, and if you read Raj's comments at the AMA, it seems rather clear that this is the case. In one way that's a good thing, because we can look at the performance, which is maybe not quite what we hoped, and say, well maybe drivers are gonna make a big difference. That one really does remain to be seen, and I'm not gonna speculate on that anymore. But that was pretty much the Volta Vega news. Vega is delayed. Volta's a machine learning chip. Now the first video that was slightly different from my normal was this Stock Madness video, after AMD shares had cratered 25%, down from about $13 to $10 in one day. And in this video I said, look, the fundamentals are good, this has been oversold, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a correction during the month. So that was around May the 5th, where the stock had dropped out almost $10, and lo and behold, over the next couple of weeks, it was back up at $12.75. It's taken a bit of a dip since then again, but it's still up 10% since that time. I believe that this dip happened when Lisa Su and Intel have both denied that there's going to be some kind of licensing deal. This rumour simply will not go away. And a lot of people might think that Fudzilla's crap, but they've got very good sources, and more often than not are right a very long time before anybody else is. And they had confirmed this whole Intel licensing AMD's graphics deal. But Lisa Su then came out and said, look, we're not looking at enabling a competitor to compete with our products. So that really should be the end of that. When you think about it, why would AMD want to license their vastly superior graphics tech? Apart from giving away HBM and stuff like that, obviously. But yeah, after she said this, and Intel had also denied it, then the stock's taken a bit of a tumble again, down to around about $11, where it's been now for about a week. What do I make of all this licensing talk? I simply don't know, but I definitely would say that Fudzilla gets it right more often than they get it wrong. So I'm not quite ready to abandon this yet. My suspicion would be that something is going on there, but it may not be quite this obvious. Again, it's another wait and see. Right, so then it moved on to, is Tom's hardware biased? I found this an interesting video, and to be honest, I do enjoy doing these ones, and I think most of you guys enjoy them as well. What had happened was, of course, Tom's had created a list of best CPUs and filled it full of Intel CPUs. Some of the choices looked a little bit dubious, and there was a massive fallout over it. So I took a really close look at all this stuff, and I pointed out one or two things like very few people are actually overclocking, but possibly the most important part was where I had noted that the 1600X was winning most, if not all, of the most recent games, whereas the i5 tended to win big in the older games like Grand Theft Auto 5 and Project Cars. A big part of the reason for me running this channel is that I am trying to change what I consider to be a lot of broken stuff in the tech industry. And stuff like this is what I consider to be, stuff that's broken, because here's the way I see this, right? In the Tom's Hardware benchmarks, the i5 was slightly faster, but it was because of bigger wins in older games. So by me pointing this out, I'm kind of hoping that, these guys who are doing these reviews are going to see this and say, yeah, you know what? He's right. Games are becoming more multi-threaded. More cores and more threads will matter. And the thing about this for me is, it's not about getting AMD to win. It's about progress. Because if these guys are going to keep on benching these old games, the old style of games, then yes, the i5s are going to win. And then they're going to say the i5 is the fastest gaming CPU. And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because more people buy i5s, more developers target the i5s. But gaming gets held back in the long run because of this. We need people seeing stuff like this and saying, yes, look, more cores are actually better in modern games. Remember, there's nothing stopping Intel from giving you more cores for the same money, apart from this crazy idea that lower core count CPUs are better for gaming. They're not. They're simply better at running older games, or more accurately, games that aren't quite so well optimized. This is what it is for me. It's about the progress. Otherwise, why did we even bother going to 4 cores? Could we not just have stuck at 2? You already know the answer to that. It's about getting here faster than what we are doing. Rather than ambling towards more cores, we can get there a lot faster if people see the reason for why we're doing it. So yesterday, Paul had finally got around to reviewing the R5 1600. And looking at his final analysis, if you remember, the reasoning behind the 5 Intel CPUs was based on this gaming price efficiency chart, where basically you simply take the cost over the average FPS, with the best CPUs down at the bottom right. But what Paul has now done is added a gaming price efficiency for the new games only. And now we see, look at the Core i5 7500, so way back here now, with the Ryzen 5 1600 now clearly ahead of everything else, apart from maybe the 7600K at 5GHz. But the point here is, of course, the author, Paul Alcorn, who I know has been watching some of my videos, and I knew would watch this video, has seen this and basically agreed that this is a fair way to look at it. And this is why I am doing this. I am trying to change the way the press is doing these things so that we get to this future that little bit faster. Paul has also benched Rise of the Tomb Raider in DX11, and as you can see, even though the i5s are that bit faster, you're talking now only a few percent, rather than the 43% or so it was under DX12. And lo and behold, what do I find out today? On the official Rise of the Tomb Raider forum, a new patch for Tomb Raider? With improved DX12 performance across a variety of hardware in CPU-bound situations, especially performance on AMD Ryzen CPUs can be significantly improved. And the only point I would want to make here is, all this time when certain members of the press were just very keen to jump on this whole CPU bottleneck thing, talking about a Ryzen CPU bottleneck where it was like 40% behind. It's clearly something wrong on the software side of things. The only thing I would say here is that some of these guys need to use a little bit of common sense, look at these games and say, there is something wrong here. There is no way that Ryzen should be a couple of percent behind in one game and then 40% behind in another game. If you're finding those kind of numbers, then you need to look at alternatives. In this case, a reasonable alternative was benchmarking DX11, but I do believe that that should have been done before the article went live. Either that, or you leave out the numbers and say, I simply do not trust these numbers are right. Everybody in the press knows enough about this to look at these numbers and say, something is wrong here. So what is being gained by using these numbers when it comes to these charts that's giving you an average FPS total that is completely skewing everything and then giving you the conclusion that the i5 is the better CPU? You gotta look for these things and say, is this one game really indicative of the rest of the games? Or are we just dealing with a clear software issue? A lot of this stuff contributed to the nonsensical view that Ryzen is bad at gaming, when the reality is, it was simply unoptimized. We will see a lot more fixes like this going forward, and I knew that that would be the case. So we can see that, other videos like my Ryzen of the Tomb Raider, they are also having an effect. And again, this is just what it's all about for me. There's one more thing I want to say about this, because obviously, Paul came under a lot of pressure. He was heavily attacked over this article. And I know some of you are thinking, well, justifiably so. But in the end, he was really only following a bunch of rules that have either been laid out for him or a bunch of rules that he had created himself. He maybe hasn't followed them to the letter, but that doesn't always mean it's about bias. Maybe it's the system that's broken rather than the bias. And quite often, there's an awful lot of AMD fanboys immediately jump to the worst possible conclusion, which is that they must be getting paid or the author is biased. It may well be the case, but, rather than jumping to that conclusion every time, why not just look and see, is it something wrong with the system instead? Right, so next up was my Prey benchmark review. Again, something a little bit different, and while I really enjoyed playing Prey, I did not so much enjoy doing this review. It's actually quite a fun video to watch, but it was a very difficult video for me to do. You might think, well, I've done reviews of graphics cards and CPUs. How can reviewing a game be any different? But it is different, and for some reason I just didn't enjoy it. It seemed kind of fiddly and a very difficult thing for me to do. I will of course be doing more games in future. I just won't be making a habit of it. But also at the end, I threw in my own angle, which was my benchmarks. And overall, we could see that the GTX 1060 was a few percent ahead of the RX 580, between 1 and 7% depending on the level. And of course, the day after benching and uploading it, Roy decides to drop me a note advising that there is a new faster driver out. So I downloaded the driver, and I'm sitting with my test bench behind me. And yeah, lo and behold, running a few benchmarks, and the RX 580 was now basically tied with the GTX 1060. It had taken the lead in the Arboretum, running around 92 frames per second. It was basically tied, running around 100 frames per second in the hardware labs. And in Psychotronics, it was running around 118, so just slightly behind the GTX 1060 in Psychotronics. So I think that was Friday night, and I'm sitting with a couple of glasses of wine, reading up on some stuff, every so often running through the benchmark sequence, checking the numbers. I'm thinking to myself, well, I may as well just throw out this video tomorrow, just for a little kind of bonus video on Saturday. But I head off to bed Friday night, wake up on the Saturday morning and decide to rebench it. Now, I'd only benchmarked the 7600K. I hadn't even got around to doing the 1600X. And I've got no idea why I decided to rebench it all, but I had. And instantly I noticed that something was up, because I was back down to 113 frames per second. And then I tried out the hardware labs, and I'm running around 98 frames per second instead of the 101, 102 I had previously. And it was a similar case in the Arboretum. The numbers were very similar to what they were previously with the previous driver. So I started thinking, well, did I actually install the driver, or has it gone back? Because I remember reading something on Reddit about the AMD driver going back to a previous version. But it didn't appear to be that. So I spent a good few hours my Saturday afternoon having a really close look at this, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And I think I finally got it. And of course, it goes back to what I was talking about before with my on-screen display tutorial. I'm not entirely sure what it's all about. It's either hardware info or Riva Tuner, and it only happens after the PC has rebooted. So basically, reboot your PC, run hardware info, then running Prey, and you're gonna lose a few frames per second. Switch off hardware info, re-benchmark it, all the numbers are back to where they should be. I just didn't quite get the time to retest it all, but there is something there. If one of you guys wants to check that out for me, feel free to do so. From here though, it does look something like an AMD driver issue, which could be costing them a couple of percent, maybe 2 or 3% performance, simply when the overlay is running. So you guys that are doing all this, what my solution would be right now, running the overlay while recording, that's fine. But while you're actually doing the benchmarking, don't have the overlay running at the same time. Only show the overlay when you're actually recording that part of the video. One or two other things that may work would be to close down Riva Tuner and hardware info, reload them, and then run Prey again. That seems to work as well. As like I said, it only seems to happen when Windows has just been loaded. You can only imagine how stuff like this is driving me absolutely crazy. And people wonder why I get so few videos out. It's because I go back and I test this stuff over and over, and by the time I've figured it all out, I've had to move on to the next video. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about, an upcoming sponsored video. What happened was MSI had contacted me late last month and said, we want you to do a Ryzen and RX 580 build video using MSI motherboard MSI graphics card, and Cooler Master and Kingston were also going to be involved. So it's a collaboration between these three companies, and my MSI PR guy had decided that he wants me to do this. Now this is a pretty big opportunity for me, so of course I said, yeah, I will do that. So I've got a bunch of parts and I'm building a PC. I bought a bunch of parts like lighting and all that stuff that my patrons had paid for. And even though I don't have a lot of room, I just have to do what I can to make do. So I've got all the parts, I've been building this video, and that is one that you will hopefully be seeing very soon. You'll also get the chance to see my handsome mug. For some reason, some of you seem desperate for me to get my face on camera, but hopefully you find that an interesting one. It's been a learning experience for me, and I've kind of enjoyed it as well, and hopefully it's been a decent video. Right, so that's pretty much it for this one. Again, it's been a week since my last video. I just wanted to get something out there. Computex has already started, the news is coming in, and I will of course be taking a closer look at one or two presentations. In a couple of weeks though, I'm going on holiday, just for a week or so back to Scotland, but just keep that in mind around the middle of June. With a bit of luck, we maybe get Vega to talk about by the end of June, but in all honesty, I'm not super hopeful about that. But let's just wait and see what AMD says at Computex. I'll catch you later, guys.